Ever enjoyed a nice meal at a restaurant? These 3 creepy stories that have happened in restaurants will change every visit you will ever make to a restaurant into a visit of horror and paranoia. So sit back and enjoy this compilation of true horrific horror to satisfy your horror cravings. At 25, I set out on a solo adventure to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ was going to perform that weekend, and I had always wanted to go anyways. For accommodation, I'd chosen a cozy Airbnb, slightly removed from the bustling city. It was a comfortable one-floor house with a modern, clean interior. The first day went smoothly. I unpacked, grabbed dinner, and headed to a rooftop venue where the DJ was performing. It was here that I met 3 people who were fellow travelers: James, Ethan, and Jess. The following day, I joined them in exploring the city. We had brunch, visited iconic spots like Christ the Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain. Unfortunately, they had a prior commitment that evening, and I returned to solo adventuring. Did I make the worst mistake of my life venturing out alone? During my journey back to the Airbnb, I stopped at a restaurant where I had a rather unsettling encounter. The restaurant was dimly lit, and the menu outside was in English, so I came inside because I wasn't very fluent in Portuguese. Inside, there was an eerie vibe. The dining area was long and narrow, with only a few other customers seated. What stood out was a man, around 50, sitting alone at a table near mine. I assumed he might be a fellow tourist. While trying to place my order, the man observed me closely, which gave me an uncomfortable feeling. Initially, the server spoke in Portuguese, but upon my request, we switched to English. That's when the man at the adjacent table began offering me unsolicited Portuguese lessons. His comments soon took a creepy turn when he complimented my Portuguese-speaking skills. Could this man have any sinister intentions? I attempted to maintain my distance by engaging with my phone, but he persisted in initiating conversations in both English and Portuguese. His questions focused on where I was from, my reasons for being in Rio, and my daily activities. To ward off his advances, I falsely claimed that I was staying with a friend. However, his comment about my sexy Portuguese was deeply unsettling and weirded me out. Thankfully, our food arrived, and the man's talking subsided while he ate. Once I finished my meal, I hastily requested a check, eager to end this encounter. Strangely, he also requested a check immediately after me, even though he was still eating. What was he up to? After settling the bill, I quickly left the restaurant, but my unease persisted. I soon realized he was following me, making me anxious about my safety. When I reached the Airbnb, I locked myself in, closed all the blinds, and reported the situation to my father. It was a Saturday night, and my flight was scheduled for the next day, but I still wanted to go out. I decided to call an Uber to a downtown bar hosting a house music night. After a few hours, I returned to the Airbnb, a bit tipsy. Upon entering, I noticed a chilling sign: an open kitchen window. I had left the windows closed due to the air conditioning. How could the window have opened up on its own? I realized right away that I needed to get up and swiftly leave the house. I dialed the emergency line and did my best to explain in Portuguese that there had been a break-in at the house. Within minutes, the cops arrived, and I quickly emerged from behind the nearby shrub where I had been hiding. I was able to inform one of the policemen that the window had been opened and that I had been being followed earlier. I couldn't comprehend the police's yells when they entered the home. The most horrifying event of my life occurred when I witnessed them leaving the Airbnb with the same man from the restaurant in handcuffs. I experienced a range of feelings, including shock, relief, and horrification. I didn't want to even consider what might have happened if I hadn't called the police, or if I had entered the bedroom where he was presumably hiding. Will I ever return back to Brazil after this? Probably not. I made the decision to hunt for a part-time job because it was the holidays and most of my pals were abroad. I eventually received a call from a neighboring restaurant inviting me to come in for a trial. The vibe there was quite unsettling. I wouldn't typically go there, but I needed the money, and I kept telling myself that I would only be here until classes resumed at college. It was around 10 p.m., and I was alone out front cleaning the cutlery while I awaited the departure of the final table. There were 4 big guys at the table. They finally got up to leave after a half hour had passed. As one of them approached the cashier to pay, I grinned. I said, "That's $42.50 total." With a big grin on his face, he immediately handed over a bunch of wrinkled notes. Sadly, I had seen this look before. so I readied myself for the corny pickup line he was going to use on me. "What are you up to tonight, cutie?" I tried to be clear that I wasn't interested in anything by saying, "Thank you and have a good night." He chuckled and made his way out the door while mumbling something. As soon as he disappeared, I hurriedly cleaned up, did the dishes, and changed out of my staff uniform. As I left the kitchen and headed into the night, I said goodbye to the final worker. I walked home every night because it was only a few blocks away in order to save money on gas. I had only been walking for about 5 minutes when I was startled by a loud whistle. I froze in terror as I peered off in the direction it came from. Was this really happening to me? The individual was the same as the restaurants. He was on the other side of the street, motioning for me to cross. I paused for a moment before beginning to move quickly away. Even though he was still a good 10 minutes away from my house, I could feel his approach. I rounded the corner and immediately began to run down the sidewalk. As resounding steps trailed closely behind, I felt tears starting to well up in my eyes. I was too afraid to look behind me. A hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder tightly and pulled me back. Was he going to kill me? I whirled around to face him. His grin had changed into a furious scowl, and his face was red. He placed his finger close to his mouth. He muttered, "Don't scream or I'll cut you." I was prepared to accept my fate at this point. Then, out of nowhere, I took hold of his face and pressed my nails firmly into his eyes. The man clenched his face in pain and let out a loud, horrible noise. Running back to my apartment, I immediately fell to the ground and began to sob in disbelief and relief. I called the restaurant and quit. I was too afraid to go back because I knew that man might be there waiting for me. Will he ever return? Just the thought keeps me up at night. Getting the creeps from these restaurant horrors? Make sure to subscribe to not miss out on any future videos. At 19, facing financial difficulties, I took up a second job as a waitress at a late-night diner. The diner remained open until 3 a.m. on weekdays and operated 24 hours during the weekends. I could only handle the overnight shifts twice a week, given my fatigue concerns. Most weekdays, I worked alone, as customers were scarce late at night. One particular night, a hefty man entered around 1 a.m., while only one other customer was present. He immediately began a flirtatious conversation, addressing me as his favorite server. I played along to secure tips, though I felt exhausted. The man ordered a burger and a milkshake, introducing himself as Trevor. His unwavering gaze and repeated visits to the diner made me uneasy. As he left a tip, but also slipped a note with his number, hinting at a secret connection. Will he stop his advancements? Days later, he returned, beginning his routine of late-night visits. He misinterpreted my friendly demeanor as interest, inviting me to join him on his boat. I managed to avoid giving him my number, but after he left, he once again left his contact information on the bill. I hoped not to see him again, but he persisted. His visits, always timed when the restaurant was empty, became increasingly unnerving. His inquiries about my shyness left me uncomfortable. His pursuit escalated as he obtained my full name through a coworker, which left me deeply disturbed. How do I get rid of this man? He eventually messaged me, revealing he had obtained my number and continued his advances. I blocked his number, hoping it would end there. However, I later found photos under my windshield wiper, images of myself at the diner, outside my apartment, and in intimate settings. Terrified, I reported the incident to the police. The detective's intervention and a warning message to the man from the police led to some peace of mind. Still, I chose to quit my job at the restaurant and move to a new apartment, determined to avoid the man's unsettling presence. It marked my first and hopefully last encounter with such a relentless stalker. However, the question still lingers. What if he comes back to haunt me?